Welcome to What is Going for new thought from the edge of Each week on OMTimes flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandie Sedgbeer conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Here is your host, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello. Neuroplasticity, the discovery that the brain is capable of rewiring itself, is now widely understood. But what few people have grasped yet is how quickly this is happening, how extensive brain changes can be, and how much control each of us has over this process, which literally can change our future and our life. Dawson Church is an award-winning author and researcher who's edited or authored a number of books in the fields of health, psychology and spirituality. His principal works are the best-selling The Genie in Your Genes, Mind to Matter, and his soon-to-be-published, in fact in just a few weeks, Bliss Brain, the neuroscience of remodeling your brain for resilience, creativity and joy. Dawson Church joins me now to share how you can rewire your brain for greater health and happiness in just 8 weeks. Dawson Church, welcome.
Sandie, it is such a pleasure to connect with you again. Thank you.
Good to have you, Dawson, and I really enjoyed the book. Very much so. So, Bliss Brain. It blends cutting-edge neuroscience with intense first-hand experience to show how we can rewire our brain for happiness, starting right now. Before we dive into some of the fascinating stories and research shared in the book, I want to home in on the events behind that phrase, intense first-hand experience, which you share in the opening chapter of the book. Tell us what happened to you in October 2017.
Well, Sandie, the anniversary is coming up soon, it's one of those really defining moments in people's lives and also in the lives of the whole community. And that was the night of what's come to be called the Tubbs Fire, and it swept through the northern part of Sonoma County, where I live, and in just a few hours, it destroyed 5,400 homes. So it was a very fast-moving fire. It moved it was estimated at about the length of a football field. Every 3 seconds, people were fleeing the fire. A lot of them didn't make it. A lot of people died in the fire. And so that's how the book opens. And it begins with my wife shaking me awake at 12:45 a.m., saying there's something wrong. And I looked at the horizon, saw this glow on the horizon, walked outside. All the power in the house went out. House was suddenly dark, and I just yelled at my wife, "We're getting out of here right now," because I could see the wildfire would be sweeping down the valley toward our home. And we literally just threw on our clothes, grabbed the car keys, ran to the car, and drove out through the flames. So when I was writing Bliss Brain, I proposed writing this book to my publisher, and it was a book about neuroplasticity and about resilience. And they said, don't just talk about the science behind this, though that's really interesting. Start with your story. Actually share your story. So I do. The first chapter of the book is the night of the fire, how totally traumatized we were, how disoriented we were. 8 of our neighbors died within 1,000 yards of our house. We knew several of the people who were just overtaken by the flames. And so the first chapter of Bliss Brain is about the fire and about the year after the fire as we gradually put our lives back together again. So it's not just a book about, normally my books are science books, I don't talk about myself, but this book is an exception where I do, in the first chapter and also later in the book, actually share my personal experience as an example of resilience.
Now, you've published many scientific papers in peer-reviewed journals, collaborating with scholars at various universities on outcome studies of post-traumatic stress disorder, depression and anxiety. And that firestorm gave you a very personal experience of this.
It did, and it was interesting to watch myself after those events, because I could see in many ways I was traumatized. So here I was, an expert in PTSD. I train thousands of professionals every year in the most advanced PTSD treatment methods. And in fact, just a week after the fire, I was giving a keynote speech at a psychology conference in Vancouver, Canada, and also I was doing a week-long workshop for therapists on how to treat psychological trauma. So I definitely found myself moving out of the realm of theory into the realm of practice and using all of these techniques on the flashbacks and the nightmares. I also, for many months, would wake up at 12:45 a.m. every night, because once your body has learned that a bad thing happened at 12:45 a.m. or whatever time of the day or night it happened for you, often your body retains that memory, and so involuntarily you're having a startle response, you're having a surge in neurochemicals like cortisol at that same time of day, which keeps you awake. Like we've worked with over 20,000 veterans in our nonprofit, and we find that often they'll be waking up at 4 a.m. in the morning if they had a mortar attack, say, in Iraq. They experienced that at 4 a.m. They'll be waking up at 4 a.m. for months or even years afterwards. So, yeah, these things really do affect your body, and you absolutely need advanced psychological and spiritual tools to work with them. And I actually got a lot of therapy after that. Colleagues of mine worked on me, worked on my wife, and it was wonderful to see how we were able to really resolve the trauma very, very quickly using EFT tapping, using meditation, using advanced psychological therapies, and within just a few weeks, we were balanced and happy again. So that's why the book focuses as well on the whole phenomenon of post-traumatic growth, because about two-thirds of people who go through a traumatic event actually don't get PTSD. They're able to either come back to a neutral baseline, or actually it accelerates their spiritual and psychological growth. So the good news is that you don't have to keep on suffering from those symptoms, and you can in fact use the financial crash, you can use the losing your house, your divorce, death of a loved one, whatever those circumstances are, that would be a big setback for most people, actually can become the fuel for your personal growth.
Yes, and, that chapter, it really does. It's a fascinating chapter. It really does establish that. You and I spoke briefly on a previous interview, probably I think it was within a month of that fire, and I remarked then on how well you seem to be coping, but I didn't know the details until I read that chapter. And on so many levels, you used those tools, the meditation, the tapping, everything that, you had at your disposal. And the bit that really interested me there, before we get on to talk about some of those tools, was the section on recreating the old, how you and your wife, Christine, kept finding yourself being drawn back to recreate, the old normal. And as I was reading that, I was thinking, this is so timely, because everybody is wanting life to go back to normal. And they're not thinking about actually how life could possibly get better moving forward.
It's so ironic, because the newspaper stories and all of the social focus is on just that. It's on putting your life back together. It's on rebuilding. So there's a lot of talk about rebuilding. And so my wife and I were swept up in that same kind of consciousness for the first while. And so even the way insurance works. So we got an insurance payment from our insurance company for the stuff we'd lost in the fire. And the way the insurance works is that if you go out and buy the same things you had, they pay you in full. So if you had a GE 20 cubic foot refrigerator and you go out and buy another GE 20 cubic foot refrigerator, they give you the full what's called replacement cost. So you can just go out and buy a new one, and they'll pay for it 100%. But if you don't, if you decide not to replace it, then they give you what's called the depreciated value, basically the garage sale value for that same item. So the whole system is rigged in this way that prompts you to go out and buy the stuff you had before. And after about 3 months of doing this, my wife and I looked at each other one day and we said, we're recreating our old lives. And we don't want to. We want to tune into the universe, see what new possibilities there are for us, live in the mystery, live in the moment, live in our highest good. And rather than just recreating, reconstituting our old lives, we want to focus on our highest new good. So at that point, we stopped buying anything, and we just began to trust the universe and began to notice synchronistic flows, and all kinds of wonderful things happened then. And so we wound up moving to a new city. We wound up getting stuff like vehicles and furniture that really was what we wanted and reflected who we are now. And we quit that whole thing, the whole idea about rebuilding from the old. So it's a tragedy is a potent opportunity to reassess. And many people listening here today have had tragedies in their lives. You've had those things that have gone wrong. Maybe you've lost your job in the recession, or maybe your business has gone bankrupt, or maybe your house has gone down in value, and you're coping with various kinds of losses and tragedies. You can use those as a potent opportunity for reappraisal. Put your life on pause, look at what you really want, tune into your highest good. In my previous book, Mind to Matter, I talk about how what you want to do is that's why it's not called mind over matter, it's mind to matter. You want to meditate, you want to get really in touch with your highest good, your guidance, and then in that elevated mental state, you then ask the universe, or if you believe in God, you can use the word God. If you don't believe in God, use the word universe. But what you do is you then tune in and you ask the universe for your highest good. I even do this at 7-day retreats with people. We have them get out of their heads. We have them get out of their thoughts about who they are and about how the world is, and we have them tune into their higher power. And then they create not the vision of themselves that is there in their local mind and their usual consciousness. You then create out of the vision of you that your higher power has of you, and that is a far more elevated vision of your life than the little small one that's dreamed up by your local brain. So I really talk about this in my books. It's powerful to every morning in meditation say, Spirit, what is my highest good today? What is your guidance for me today? What is your guidance for my life? You then live this life of ecstasy, and that's why after the fire, I had no plans to write another book after Mind to Matter, but I thought after a year, I'm incredibly happy. Here I am. We also had a big financial crash after the fire, and I'd have an operation, had some medical problems. And I thought, I've gone through all this stuff, and here I am. I'm just meditating, tapping, and I am just incredibly happy. I need to share this with people. So that's the genesis of Bliss Brain.
Well, with the studies showing that people spend about 47% of their time in negativity, I think the book is very, very timely and we all need to read it. So let's talk about Bliss Brain and the components thereof. I mean, you've talked about tapping, you've talked about meditation, and the science on meditation is just, it's extraordinary. It's, if everybody knew about it, I think everybody would be meditating. And we need them to.
We need them to. And the science of what it does to your body is stunning. So just leaving out the brain for a moment because it has profound effects on the brain. But in my books, I talk about the effects on the body. And Sandie, they are remarkable. For example, meditation leads to things like increased bone density. You want your bones denser, you want your bones stronger. Well, meditation actually triggers the growth of bone. It triggers increases and retention of muscle mass. So, again, as you grow older especially, you want to maintain your muscle mass. Older people tend to lose their muscle mass and become weaker. And meditation literally triggers the growth of new muscles. Meditation triggers the growth in your brain of the insulating sheaths that go around your neurons and help them conduct information better. So in your memory and learning centers, they're becoming more sharp if you meditate. Stem cells are the like these blank cells that can differentiate into nerves or muscle or bone. And what they're found in different parts of the body, as you age, the number of stem cells you have declines. And so meditation actually triggers your body to produce new stem cells. Also, your main anti-aging molecule and marker is this little molecule called telomerase. And you have these telomeres on chains of these molecules on the ends of your chromosomes. And meditation literally triggers the production of telomerase molecules and longer telomeres, in other words, a longer lifespan. In some studies, the longevity bonus of meditation or of a positive attitude that meditation produces is over 10 years. In other words, you get 10 extra years of life minimum from doing it. So absolutely. I mean, these are not trivial effects. These are, no drug can do this for you. No kind of medical advance can create stem cells, create telomerase molecules in your body, strengthen your muscles and your bones, make your skin not wrinkle as fast. I mean, all of these things are going on when you meditate deeply. So you're right. The health effects are profound, and anybody who cares about their health, certainly you're going to want to have clean water, clean food, exercise, do all the other things that you can do on the material level, but just changing your consciousness through meditation is going to produce profound shifts in your body.
Proof indeed that everything we need is within us.
It is, and it's amazing. Mind to matter, these seemingly immaterial practices like tapping, which shifts your acupuncture meridian energy flows, and simple practices like a deep meditation, those things, those shifts in consciousness can trigger changes in your mood. You feel much better, you feel much happier, more positive, more optimistic, more altruistic, and then that triggers all these changes in your health. And it's done purely by changing your consciousness. That's all you have to change, and suddenly all of these other beneficial changes happen in your body.
So tell us, why is it that so many people have such difficulty meditating?
Sandie, that is a key question. And the reason that we have trouble meditating is our brains are not designed to be at rest and to be quiet. Our brains are designed to be active and alert. Because if you think about it, go back 10,000 years or 100,000 years to your distant ancestors, and it was really absolutely essential to their survival that they have an alert brain. And so you wanted to make sure your brain was scanning the horizon, looking for that blade of grass out of place that meant that there was a tiger lurking behind the grass, or that thing in the path in front of you. Is that a reed or is it a snake? Well, you need to make really sure. If it's a snake, you notice it's a snake and don't think it's a reed, and then get a snake bite that kills you. So our brains evolved over literally 400 million years of mammalian evolution to be extremely alert to anything bad going on in our environment. And not only that, when we close our eyes and rest, so say, for example, this is a famous study done by two Harvard psychiatrists who looked at what people's mental state is when they're at rest. And they found what they thought they would find is that people would be kind of miserable when they were working, miserable when they were on their computers, and they'd be happiest when they were just kicking back and sitting, watching TV, or in the backyard sitting at Coke. And it turned out to be exactly the opposite. They found that people were most miserable when they weren't doing anything. And that also is the way the brain works, because when you aren't doing anything, then when you are doing stuff, there's a network of regions called the task-positive network of the brain that's active. So you're writing an email, you're writing a poem, you're singing a song, you're doing a yoga class, you're taking a walk, you're talking to a friend. All of those things are tasks, and they activate the task-positive network of the brain. But when the brain is not doing a task, then that all shuts down, and the brain has tons of spare capacity. Now the brain has extra capacity to do stuff with, and what it does is it then shifts all of its resources to another second network called the default mode network. And the default mode network, Chapter 2 of Bliss Brain, is all about the default mode network, which is what makes it impossible for meditators to meditate. Because you close your eyes or you sit down to relax, the default mode network turns on, because it's the default. It's just what the brain defaults to when it's not doing something else. And the default mode network builds your sense of self. Your default mode network constructs the you that you think you are, your preferences, your behavior, your sense of self. All of that's held in the default mode network, and it especially focuses on any threats to self. So it will obsess about the bad performance review you got at your job maybe 10 years ago, and also maybe you will get a bad performance review in your job in a week. So the default mode network absolutely obsesses about the bad stuff from the past and the bad stuff that might happen in the future, most of which, of course, never does happen. So that ability was absolutely critical for your ancestors. They needed to think about the tiger that almost ate them 10 years ago and whether they might have another tiger in their path tomorrow. So the default, that's why the brain works that way. But now we want to meditate, want to have inner peace. We sit down, close our eyes. The task positive network shuts down. The default mode network cranks up. And all we can think about is our email inbox and our fight we had with our spouse and our teenage daughter wanting to have a tattoo. And, I mean, all this stuff starts to flood through our brains because that's the way the brain is designed to be. It's designed to be helping us stay safe. And it's great if you're 100,000 years ago in an archaic environment full of threats, full of predators, full of competing tribes. Absolutely. It was great to have a brain that worked that way. Today, in the modern world, where we have no tigers, no lions, no snakes out to gobble us up, no hostile tribes attacking us from over the hill, now we have the default network cranking up and you try and meditate, and all you do is think about the bad stuff from the past and the possible bad stuff of the future. So that's why people try and meditate and they can't. So it's just the way the brain works. Now, this is really comforting to me and many people because you realize that the reason you're a negative thinker, the reason you're obsessed about the bad stuff in your life isn't that you're a bad person, you're a negative person. It's just the way your brain evolved to work. And that is a crucial piece of knowledge because when you know that, you then can look for ways of shifting your brain function. But Chapter 2 of Bliss Brain is all about the default mode network, how it distracts us, how it fires up when we try and meditate, how it stops us meditating, and then the book starts to give you tools, tips, hacks to actually change the way your brain works and then evolve different kinds of brain activity.
Yeah, I love the way you described it. You talked about, what the brain goes through, all these distractions happening, and you took the default mode network, reduced it to DMN, called it the demon, and said that, the me show that happens with all of this distraction, when all we're thinking about is me, and everything to do with me, it's the demon's ultimate weapon of mass distraction. I thought that was really neat.
Yeah, DMN, default mode network. At some point I said, that sounds a lot like demon. And that's what it is to most people. In fact, the Buddha, I tell lots of stories in the book. I tell stories from spiritual traditions like Buddhism and Christianity. Also, people's personal stories about doing these practices and the breakthroughs they had. But the Buddha, on the eve of his enlightenment, he spent 6 years doing all kinds of studying and ascetic practices and trying to reach enlightenment and failing. And he just kind of gave up and sat underneath the Bodhi tree for a whole night. So he was underneath this fig tree, and this demon called Mara, king of the demons, decided to try and distract the Buddha from his single-pointed focus on meditation and on being one with the universe. And so the king of the demons got all these other demons, and I talk about this as a metaphor, an allegory. And he, for example, has these other demons show him all the disasters that might happen. And so they throw all of these images at him of disaster after disaster after disaster, just the way the default mode network is designed to do. And that doesn't distract him from his focus. He just stays 100% focused on being one with the universe. And then they say, well, we totally have failed to distract him with disasters, let's now try and distract him with opportunities. So Mara, the king of the demon, becomes like a pimp. He parades in front of the Buddha's mind every possible woman and every size, shape, gender, every size, shape, race, color combination. And so he just parades all these women in front of the Buddha, trying to distract the Buddha with pleasure. He's failed to distract the Buddha with disaster. Now he tries the opposite thing, pleasure. And the Buddha just remains completely centered. After being centered for the whole night, the Buddha breaks through to enlightenment. So that's an allegory for the path of the seeker. We focus on our spiritual journey. We meditate repetitively. We have good days when meditation is easy. We have bad days when it's hard. We just persist. And if you meditate effectively, and again, I make a distinction in the book between effective meditation and ineffective meditation, but if you meditate effectively, then you have that breakthrough, and your brain starts to rewire itself, and it becomes easier and easier and easier.
Yeah. You're listening to What is Going On. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. My guest today is researcher, founder of EFT Universe, Dawson Church, who's the author of the best-selling books, The Genie in Your Genes, Mind Over Matter. We're talking about his latest book, Bliss Brain, the neuroscience of remodeling your brain for resilience, creativity and joy. Still to come, how 7 simple evidence-based practices can combine to make meditation easy and effective for anyone. We'll be back in a moment. Stay tuned.
The future of internet radio is here. OMTimes Radio, IOM FM.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
More than 24 million Americans have an autoimmune disorder, and that number continues to grow. I'm Sharon Saylor, and I'm one of those 24 million. To put that number in perspective, cancer affects about 9 million and heart disease up to 22 million. That's why I've brought together top experts and those thriving regardless of their diagnosis to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information. Join me, Sharon Saylor, Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, for the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio to find out how to live your life uninterrupted.
Hello, I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes' flagship radio show, What is Going On. As a long-time editor, book judge, spiritual magazine publisher and radio host, I've read thousands of books and interviewed hundreds of authors and teachers. So I know what's worth reading and what isn't. Now, with the spiritual book market growing increasingly crowded, more and more people are seeking my help in finding the authentic voices, the empowering tools, and the genuine skip the BS guidance that will make the most difference to their spiritual development. So I decided to make it easier by bringing my knowledge, experience, and considerable network of contacts together in the No BS Spiritual Book Club. There are no ads, no joining fees, no obligations, and no BS. Just an ever-growing library compiled by recognizable and respected names of the 10 best books that help them the most on their journeys. Plus free book excerpts, audios, and live video interviews where you can quiz them about their spiritual journeys and their 10 best list choices. Your time and money are valuable, your spiritual journey even more so. If you're looking for genuine guidance from people who've walked this path before you, check out Sedgbeer.com. Click on the No BS Spiritual Book Club tab and join the club. That's Sedgbeer.com, SEDGBEER.com. I'll see you there.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Welcome back. Dawson Church, you came up with a very clever idea to combine 7 simple evidence-based practices, and in doing so you created a formula that puts people into deep states automatically and involuntarily, and you call it eco-meditation. Tell us, how did you come up with that idea?
Well, I was meditating, contemplating the idea that there are so many wonderful evidence-based kinds of stress reduction tools. Like, for example, I love heart math and the heart coherence, quick coherence technique, freeze frame, some of their other techniques. And so I've been using those for many years. I like them. And we know from research they're effective. We also know EFT is effective. We know mindfulness is effective. We know that diaphragmatic breathing is effective. We know that certain kinds of neurofeedback, biofeedback are effective. And so I said to myself one day, around, I think, 2007, I thought, I love all these techniques, and what would happen if I did them all together? If I did them all sequentially, one after the other, if I were to use this biofeedback technique, then use this technique to relax the nervous system and activate the vagus nerve, and then if I also did mindful breathing, if I just strung them all into one procedure, what would happen? And I found that it was the most effective form of meditation I'd ever used, and it didn't require me to still my mind, because I have a really hard time quieting my mind, as do most meditators. And if you do these things, they're all physiological instructions. Like, one of them is to breathe 6 seconds in, 6 seconds out. That puts you into heart coherence. Another is to relax your tongue on the floor of your mouth, which activates your relaxation half of your nervous system, your parasympathetic nervous system. So I did them all together, and I found that without having to still my mind, I could reach these deep states. So I was at a conference a few months later, and I asked the organizer, would you mind if I did this meditation with the whole audience? And she said, sure, go ahead. So there were about 200 people in the room. I did the meditation, and I got this incredible feedback. People were saying things like, I've never been successful at meditating before in my life with any technique I tried, and suddenly I was in a deep state. And you'll find we've now got dozens of testimonials on our website of people who had the same experience, failing other meditations, and then the first time they tried this, that they were able to meditate. So I found that was my first experience with it as a group, and I found that it was incredibly effective. Since then, I've refined it as new research has done. We've tweaked it here and there. But basically, it's just putting together those 7 techniques, and then people go into this very, very deep state, and it's involuntary. It's not like you're having to achieve this deep state. We've done several studies now of eco-meditation, and in one of them, the researchers found that complete novices were able to reach the same kind of state as a Tibetan monk who'd been doing it for 10,000 hours. So 10,000 hours of meditation practice, Tibetan monk, what his brain profile looks like, and then a complete novice meditator doing it for the very first time was able to achieve that same kind of brain state. And so we've now done a lot of research using MRIs, using EEGs, studying meditators, and then extracting the information and reverse engineering what they're doing to produce those brain states so we can train novices to do them really, really quickly. So that's eco-meditation.
I love the fact that there's so much science in the book. The evidence is there, cannot be refuted. So tell me, let's talk about Bliss Brain now and some of the elements in the book. You say that research shows that enlightenment is a formula, that there are actually 7 neurochemicals of ecstasy that the body naturally produces, which you describe as the Bliss Brain cocktail. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, the first point that you mentioned was that meditation has been very much the province of adepts for tens of thousands of years. So if you wanted to have this kind of enlightenment experience, you need to go into a monastery. You need to often undergo years of initiation. You need to go through various kind of rituals. You need to study with a master for a long time. You'd have to practice various disciplines. And then people eventually, a small percentage of them actually became enlightened after doing all that stuff. But it was, like the Buddha's example, 6 years of being the most rigorous spiritual practice that he could possibly find. And so there's been this process for the last, hundreds of thousands of years of initiation to get there. But now we're able to take these people who did that, these initiates, study their brain, look at their neurochemistry, and then see what's going on. And then when we are able to get a brain profile of that adept, we then can take a novice and train them to acquire that brain profile within a few minutes. Like in my last retreat was over New Year's before the whole pandemic happened, and we had about 40 people in a hotel, 7 days, and the first day they were able to achieve that kind of brain profile in maybe 6 to 8 minutes. By the last day, they were able to do it in under 4 minutes, and one woman did it in 47 seconds. 47 seconds from sitting down, closing your eyes, to a complete enlightenment brain pattern. So it is possible to now that we've done the research on these monks, to train novices to do that same set of procedures and acquire those states really quickly. And then the 7 neurochemicals are really interesting because we can get these neurochemicals in various ways. Like, for example, one of them is called anandamide, and it was a molecule discovered fairly recently, and it has the same chemical structure as THC, which is the active ingredient in marijuana. So you smoke marijuana, you feel happy, because all these THC molecules are docking with receptor sites in the brain, but they're docking with the receptor sites for anandamide. So what meditators do, there's a wonderful image in the book of St. Francis of Assisi, who's basically stoned. He's laying there, passed out in the arms of his disciples. Has had such an intense experience of oneness with the divine that he is so blissed out that time and space have disappeared for him. And so that's what these mystics have been sharing with us now for centuries, is that the Rumis and the Hafizes and the St. Teresas and these amazing people in spiritual history have been sharing that they go to these places, Mount Sinai or the desert or Mount Everest, and they come back with these experiences of having had touched the divine and then had this experience of ecstasy. So we now know it has a neurochemical profile, and that the main molecule involved there is anandamide. And that's led to the discovery of these what are called the endocannabinoids in our bodies. So our bodies naturally produce that same molecule, that fits into that receptor for anandamide. We can either smoke marijuana and produce that effect externally, or simply achieve an ecstatic state and have the same molecule produced as anandamide internally in a safe dose. That's just one molecule. Another molecule that you get is beta endorphins, and this is what's called the runner's high. So if you exercise and you get to a certain point of really being in flow, in the groove, and I talk a lot in the book about getting to flow states, because essentially a meditation state is a flow state, the deepest flow state you can imagine. So now you're having a runner's high, and suddenly, even though the runner may have begun with their feet hurting and their knees creaky and not feeling that good when they began their run, they break through to the runner's high. Their brain is flooded with beta endorphins, and then they don't feel any more pain. Beta endorphin, one of your endorphins, it is 3 times as effective as synthetic morphine. So morphine docks with your beta endorphin receptors and takes away your pain. So there are these various neurochemicals like serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, produced by feelings of love and affection or by touch. So another one of those. And so you can get these chemicals various ways. If you touch your child or hug a friend, you get a surge in oxytocin. But the only way you get all 7 of these highly pleasurable neurochemicals, anandamide, beta endorphin, serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, all at the same time in this perfectly balanced cocktail that bathes your brain and then produces ecstasy, is by deep, effective meditation. And you do that, and that's why you have that St. Francis experience, or that St. Teresa of Avila experience of just becoming completely enchanted. And then after you do this, the cool thing is that you do this on Monday, again on Tuesday, again on Wednesday, again next week, next month, keep on doing it for a while. And now you're used to flooding your brain with these ecstatic neurochemicals. You're used to being in ecstasy every morning in meditation. And now your whole life starts to change. These neurochemicals produce this wave of bliss in the morning. And then in the research I talk about later in the day, it shows that the effects last for about 48 hours. And people in those flow states are, Sandie, this number is so uncanny. I just have to just say it slowly. But it's a 10-year research study by McKinsey Consultancy showed that these people in these states are 5 times as productive as when they aren't in these states. So in other words, what you would normally take 5 days to do at work, you're now doing in 1 day. You're 5 times as productive when you're in a flow state, according to that study. And I quote other studies that show the same thing. So your creativity, your productivity, your problem-solving ability goes through the roof once you're experiencing that bliss brain state and you're in flow. So that's just one of the effects that these kinds of states produce in your body and brain.
And it only takes 8 weeks, 12 minutes a day to start kickstarting the change.
That is the other stunning thing. I looked at both ends of the time continuum. So I thought, well, how long does it take to start having these effects? And the answer is just exactly that, 12 minutes a day for 8 weeks. The neuroplasticity happens so fast in the brain that already we can measure the brain changing. And then in one of my star case histories, which I share in both Mind to Matter and Bliss Brain, is the case of Graham Phillips, who was a TV journalist and said, well, I read meditation is good for you. I want to try it. So he took his whole TV crew into an advanced neuroimaging lab at Monash University in New Zealand, and they did a whole TV show on him before and after an 8-week meditation and mindfulness course. And they mapped just in these high-resolution MRIs, they mapped every part of his brain. And after just 2 weeks of mindfulness, he felt much less stressed, much less rushed. After 8 weeks of mindfulness, the part of his brain that governs, that coordinates emotional regulation, that makes you not overreact, not be stressed, not be all emotionally triggered by what's going on around you, that part of the brain, it's a little tiny C-shaped sliver of tissue in the center of the brain, but it coordinates emotional regulation across the whole brain. That part of his brain had grown by 22.8% in only 8 weeks. I mean, that's more than that's like a quarter growth bigger. So now he doesn't just feeling better. He literally has more neural tissue to help him be resilient. So now when maybe he has a divorce or maybe he has a car crash or he has an adverse event, it's not just the habit of feeling good and all those pleasurable neurochemicals. He literally has more neurons in his brain governing emotional regulation, and the process only takes 8 weeks.
Yeah. You talk about how much meditation, how popular it's become over the last year. There's been a huge increase in a very short period. And then you raise the question that, because more people are meditating and more people are experiencing compassion, is compassion driving brain evolution?
Now, this is a really interesting question, and I'm actually working on a new book about this, which it's a few years out. But what I believe may be happening is that there is at least a possibility that compassion is changing our brains. You think about things like the abolition of slavery, and it really picked up speed around 17 1770s, 1790, in England and the U.S., there were these abolitionist movements, and finally, of course, slavery was pretty much gone by the mid-1800s. So in less than a century, we got rid of this institution of oppressing other people that had been around for the whole of human history. And in only 100 years, we changed our collective consciousness and got rid of it. Think also about social movements like giving women the vote, women's suffrage. The first women's suffrage movements began in the 1870s, 1880s, and in New Zealand gave women the vote in 1893, and then by the 1930s, women had the vote in virtually every industrialized country. So it took around 40 years for us to change our minds collectively about women. And these were powerful people giving power to other people. In the case of slavery, the slave owners had no incentive to relinquish their power. In fact, they had every incentive to hang on to their power, and yet they gave it up. They voluntarily, for the most part, let go of it. Men who'd been ruling the roost for millennia, forever, in patriarchal societies, suddenly decided that wasn't fair. Child labor, again, took about 30, 40 years to abolish child labor, but it got done. So now you fast forward to today, things like gay marriage, things like legalized abortion, things like legalized drugs. So gay marriage went from most people in most Western societies being against it to it being the law within about 10 years. Happened really, really, really quickly. Things like the legalization of marijuana happened fairly fast. So now we're changing our minds. We're becoming more compassionate. Those things are becoming laws. And now, just the most current way with the Me Too movements and the Black Lives Matter movement, we're taking our social responsibilities really seriously, and we're having massive mind change around all kinds of subjects which we were really passive about and abuses we accepted for a long time. We're now saying enough is enough, no more, and taking these stands, and society's changing. So we have these huge global mind changes, and they're driven by compassion. With the Me Too movement, we no longer think it's acceptable for women to be victimized, and we're just millions of us all over the world are standing up and saying that in all countries, and so there's movement in human consciousness in that direction. Black Lives Matter. Those protests aren't just in a few cities where black people were killed. They're all over the world. So we're having these big tectonic shifts in human consciousness, and again, they're driven by us, by decency, by compassion, by altruism. And so what I argue, if you look at the sweep of history, is that humans as a species are becoming more compassionate, and that this trend is going to dramatically accelerate as more and more people meditate in the coming decades.
Yes, I mean, you wrote that a single happy person makes the people around them happier by 34%. And those affected in turn, and so it continues. So here we have meditation, Bliss Brain, people getting more relaxed, happier, more compassionate. Then we've got the emotional contagion effect. So we're all spreading it amongst one another. And research shows that the increase in problem-solving ability that Bliss Brain produces is 490%. Now, if all of us are working at that level, we have the solution. We have the solution to all of the problems on the planet.
I believe, Sandie, in the next decades, we're going to solve climate change. We're going to solve overpopulation. We're going to solve clean water and clean food and human rights for everyone in the world. I think we're on the verge of an unprecedented era of human flourishing. I'll give you just one tiny example. So there are about 2 trillion trees on the planet. And we know that deforestation and habitat destruction have really affected the number of trees, and that even though we're planting more trees than we cut down nowadays, that it isn't equal to the task of absorbing all the carbon in the atmosphere. So there's this big focus on what do we do about climate change, how do we suck up all this carbon? Well, it turns out that if we had an extra trillion trees, so we have 2 trillion now, and if we have 3 trillion, it would soak up all the carbon. It would basically take us back to the pre-industrial era in terms of climate change. It would be a really good thing. So there is a concerted scientific effort underway right now to figure out how to plant 1 trillion trees in a decade. And it's being done in a high-tech way. There are these tree planting drones that can plant hundreds of thousands of trees in just a matter of days by firing little pellets with fertilizer and the seeds into the dirt where they grow and take over from there. There are these amazing examples. There are other machines that literally can suck carbon out of the atmosphere. There are several plants in operation now in different parts of the world that are literally doing that right now. So there are these technologies that are converging, driven by consciousness, driven by caring about people, about the planet. And so I believe we're in for a remarkably wonderful future.
Well, I hope you're right, and I hope people are realising, having experienced, this hiatus and how nature has responded to that so positively, that we just need to keep that going. It's a fantastic book, Dawson. It's absolutely, you're so generous with the amount of free resources, what you call the extended play resources that you offer with audio, video, web resources, that, it pays for itself again and again and again.
Yeah, I have those extended play sections after every chapter because obviously I can't put a video in the book and I can't put an audio in the book, but I have those for every chapter, and you can just log in, grab those, and then there are things like interviews with me and various scientists and other web resources you can get. So, yeah, I love sharing all of that so we can make the experience as vivid for people as possible and give them the tools to take action to apply these ideas in their own lives.
And that's exactly what people need, is the experience, not just reading the book. One last question. We're almost out of time. You have a passion for transformation. Where's your passion guiding you next?
Well, I love the evidence of the book showing that you get happier and happier and happier, because I ask at a certain point in, I think, Chapter 8, is there an end point? Do we hit a plateau, hit a wall where we don't get any happier past that point? And the answer is no, that the brain science shows you get happier and happier. So I'm really my own experiment. I'm loving after having had a very unhappy childhood and first half of my life, having a wonderfully happy time now and getting happier. So my own personal growth journey is one that really intrigues me. But then how do we catalyze that kind of joy and that kind of evolution, that kind of spiritual evolution planet-wide? So my next book is going to go big. It's going to go, Bliss Brain is really about how you can be not just slightly happier. In one set of studies, they show that people don't just get a bit happier. They get, wildly ecstatic every day.
I'll have some of that.
That's for the individual. Bliss Brain is for the individual. It's for you. But the next book is going to be about the planet and how we can bring these changes on a planetary scale and then help everyone be much happier and much more productive. So that's really what I'm looking to as the next step.
Well, I'll definitely have some of that, and I'm sure many of our listeners would like to have that too. Dawson Church, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure.
Sandie, bless you, and thank you.
Thanks. Bliss Brain, the neuroscience of remodeling your brain for resilience, creativity and joy, is published by Hay House, and it is filled with deepening practices and extended play resources. You can check out Dawson Church, everything that he does and offers at EFTuniverse.com and DawsonChurch.com. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. You can learn more about me and join the book club at Sedgbeer.com. Thanks for spending this time with us. I look forward to returning at the same time next week. Till then, it's goodbye from me.